I'm going to talk about incentives and efficiency effects. And when I agreed on this title, I don't remember how many weeks ago, they were long weeks ago, I wasn't sure about what I was going to present. And it could be something that I already was working on, or it could be something new. And then I decided to have fun, which means I'm going to present something that is new and I'm still exploring. So it's more for my benefit than for your benefit that I'm here, okay? And so, and yesterday I have a scare, some of the work disappeared, but I was able to recover. Okay, so what is the issue I want to tackle with you within this broad theme? I don't know how many of you are aware, but now the European Commission, the OECD, and the Observatory of Health Systems publishes reports, country reports on, and they published last Thursday the country reports for the several countries. This is from the Portuguese one, so this works as advertisement for policy documents, but also for what matters to me. And in the Portuguese one, there was this sentence there. And it says basically that in the short term, the National Health Service financial sustainability seems to stem from low-quality financial management, which has led to growing arrears in supplier payments, and government measures do not seem sufficient to guarantee the clearance of arrears or to impose robust spending control. And then we can ask what this has to do with efficiency. Okay? Well, my main point here, and then the thing that I want to deal with empirically today, and I have some thoughts about what are the theoretical background of it, of how to deal with this issue. I can advance some ideas on that as well. And the point here is that these growing arrears could be the result of two issues. Could be the result of wrong incentives to hospitals to build them, and could be the result of inefficiency of the hospitals that are being underfunded. And so when we talk about inefficiency effects, one of the ways they can appear is actually by having arrears or debt in the hospitals. And so what I want to explore is whether the government will be actually contributing to the problem by having the wrong incentives on the hospital part. So I'm not going to look on what will be the natural thing that you would sort from the title. That is to say, okay, let's take some departments, let's see the incentives the hospital has set, or see the payment system that the hospital has, and see how they behave. I want to look on a more critical issue, is to say, okay, what is this arrears problem, and what are the incentives that may be contributing to it, and how can we change that? Okay? So it's going to have a little bit of it's a kind of problem that can have an empirical part, a theoretical part, and a policy applied part. I'm going to give you the empirics. I have some ideas about the other two, so we can discuss along those two. And I even have a board to put a model if I want to. That's great. Okay? So this is my issue. So let me get you to the problem itself. And the questions that I want to address today here is, does the government create its own problems by setting the wrong incentives? And so in a sense, I will explain in a minute what I mean by this. And the second thing is, does these incentives, as reflected in the payment system, matters to the hospital? To two things, to build up arrears and to quality of care. Okay? And so one of my concerns will be, what is the process by which you get these arrears, and do these arrears create actually problems in the management of hospital that brings inefficiency that harm quality of care? Okay? So these will be the two broad questions I want to go. So how does it go, the hospital payments in Portugal? Well, basically the hospitals receive by global budget. And in that sense, the question is, how is that global budget set? Basically, they try to compute the expected costs of what is the predicted activity of the hospital, using the RGs and then adjusting for special programs. So they have the RGs for a lot of things. Then you have HIV patients. HIV patients are paid separately because of the cost of HIV drugs. So you have a couple of these programs. And, but basically, the global budget should be kind of ex-ante component, right, that you have on those. And they actually sign a contract between the central administration of the National Health Service and the hospitals, setting what is the expected activity and what is the budget they will receive. So in a sense, it seems kind of prospective payment kind of story, get a global budget. Now, the story starts to be more confusing when everyone knows, and when everyone means hospitals, hospital managers, newspapers, politicians, that what the hospitals receive is actually ad hoc adjusted downwards due to the financial constraints of the general government. So they know from the start that the financial budget they are going to receive is not sufficient to cover the expected activity they're going to have. Okay? Which, of course, creates an expectation that will be some extra money somewhere. or that they will have to not do some things that nobody specifies what that should be. Now, inside this general scheme, there are a different group of hospitals that is integrated with primary care in what we call local units, health local units, unidades locais de saúde in Portuguese, so the term ULS, where the amount they receive is not by the activity of the hospital, but is set as a per capita payment. So since these guys have integrated primary care and hospital activities into the same management unit, they receive by capitation. So they will have supposedly a different set of incentives that these guys have. Yes, €5, please. €5 for the delay.
I couldn't find the place.
I didn't ask for excuses. Okay, so a side issue could be these guys that receive on a capitation payment instead of a global budget with activity will behave differently or not. Now, the guys that receive by capitation, they actually face the same problems as the other ones in the sense that they do the capitation they receive in the beginning is supposedly to serve for both primary care and hospital, but it's lower usually than what was the spending of the previous year, so it becomes the issue of whether they are underfunded or not. So then what can hospitals do or these ULS do? They have two options, right? They can cut down services and meet the budget, or they can just create debt and do not pay some providers and just do the service that's required by the public service, by the NHS. Okay? Now, if they are efficient, the sense is that even if they are efficient, they will run some deficit, so they will have to create some debt. But if they are inefficient, they have a reason to create debt as well. And so one of the concerns is how much of this arrears or this debt will actually be inefficiency and what will be funding. That I'll try to not solve that problem, but try to advance some things on that later. So the main issue then here is, okay, we know that we're going to have underfunding, so how does this translate into their activity? So what is the problem there? Well, if they expect extra funds, they will behave according to that. They will not be concerned too much about it. And if the extra funds are the larger is the outstanding debt they have, then you're creating the wrong incentives, right? Because you're transforming this basically in something that will be close to cost reimbursement. Because if you pay what debt they have, they basically want to have debt to receive more. So to whom do they stop paying? Well, they stop paying to the pharmaceutical industry. Why the pharmaceutical industry? Because they have enough power to negotiate with the government the extra reinforcements of budget. So we have something that goes on this that is undermining this part. And so one question that I would like to answer, and I'm not going to answer it today at least, is whether these arrears that I'll show you how much they are a result of underfunding or inefficient operation. And that will be a critical issue. Now, as you probably know, Portugal was under international lending obligations from 2011 to 2014, and one of the major issues was precisely these arrears. And they were not able to solve it. But in the documents of IMF and the documents of the European Commission reviewing the progress of Portugal, and there are one every 3 months, they always focus on this issue. Okay? So if you can find for me a solution to this, I will sell it and get $1 million. Okay? So what is the issue? So this is a timeline of the arrears problem, not on a hospital by hospital base, which will be the data I'll be working on, but on the aggregate data, so just to give you a glimpse of what is going on, okay? So we start in 2011, May 2011, intervention of Portugal. They start digging up what are the true deficits, true public deficit, and one of the things they start discovering is that there are a lot of debts in the hospitals that were not recorded. And so for the first months, they start building up these things, and you start having an issue that you're starting to recognize what's going on. And so this is done by the Ministry of Finance, not by the Ministry of Health, so the numbers become reliable. And you have this trend here, this broad trend here. And this was a growth of overall, in monthly terms, 80 million euros of debt a month extra that was found. And the total budget of the NHS at this time was close to 9 billion. And the hospitals are half of it. So having almost a billion in debt. It was kind of 25% of the hospital spending that was not being recognized in the things. Okay, after you have these things, of course, you start putting money into it, and you get the highest NHS budget ever, which is something that politicians always like to claim, and you are able to repay over time to pharmaceutical companies so that that goes down. You finish the 6 months of repayment, and you go to business as usual. And what we see is that this thing starts to grow again with a normal operation. So on this pace here, goes along. At the end of the year, they recognize they have it. What they do another settlement, more money. They get down the debt level here, and they let the hospitals manage. What happens when the hospitals manage? Debt goes up again. Then they start putting some more pressure on the hospitals. We have a period with a kind of downward trend, interrupted for 3 months, downward trend for a government here. And so we arrived on August 2015. Elections are in the 5th of October 2015, so in 2 months' time. What the government does, takes out the pressure on the hospitals. What happens when we stop having pressure on the hospitals? That starts rising again. So you have another trend here. Elections are here, and you keep going until November last year, where the government announced again to put $500 million into the hospitals against kind of 10% of their annual budget, of the government annual budget, and you get it down here. Once you have this thing, January starts. What you start seeing in January, the red line going up again, now with a faster pace than before. Okay? So what is critical points for me here? First, elections were actually anticipated 2 months not to have any effect on pressure for hospitals. So once you release the pressure, they start putting more debt. Once you have a settlement and you get the extra money to pay some of the debt, then afterwards that you learn that the new government is actually going to the old system and you go up. Okay? And so the question is how to break this cycle, in a sense. And the other thing is try to convince politicians that you should not look on the debt at the end of the year, but on these slopes. That's what matters, but that's another different issue. And what I'm going to concentrate here will be between the period from the start of this blue line to the end of the red line, and using this settlement to check a couple of things. In particular, check whether the government, by putting more money, is actually creating an incentive for these hospitals to increase more their debt, so creating a moral hazard issue, in particular if they put relatively more money on the ones that have relatively more debt. Okay? Because, of course, the larger ones will have more debt and they will receive more. But the question is, what is the kind of elasticity to this? Okay? Sure. Can ask everything.
Yes. So one other way to put that is to have waiting lists, right? So do you have data on what the waiting times were during this period?
Some data, and I will have it as a measure of quality later on. But I don't have, I have just a general value of waiting time until surgery for programmed surgeries. Okay, so I don't have the whole thing. The whole thing is available in the system, but they don't disclose it publicly. Okay, so if the minister wants, I can have access to it, but publicly available data, just this waiting time until surgery.
Could I ask just two definitional things? What do you mean by debt? Because presumably what you're talking about there is operating costs and the capital stock's just plummeting.
Yeah.
But you could, as a hospital, if you write in the capital stock, increase your debt artificially.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, when you say inefficiency, what's the output?
Yeah. Good questions. First, what do I mean by arrears? And I am going to use arrears and debt interchangeably, okay? Just for simplicity. The arrears definition is payment delayed more than 90 days after the due date. So if they create a duty to pay something, so to a pharmaceutical company on 1st of January, then they have usually 90 days to pay. So those 90 days don't count. And then you count 90 days after that, and only after the 180 days, it becomes arrear. Okay? So it's delayed payment from more than 180 days. So kind of.
Does that cover staff costs, for example?
covers everything that they will have an outstanding duty to pay to someone. If they stop paying wages for more than half a year, which is basically 180 days, that would count. But they don't stop paying wages. What they stop is paying providers of services or goods or devices. So they don't pay to people providing consumables for machinery. They don't pay basically to pharmaceuticals, which is close to 90% of those debts, and they don't pay medical devices. Okay? And I didn't put here, but after the break or in the middle of the session that was not appearing, I can show you how the debt to the pharmaceutical part, which is reported by them, actually matches well the growth that this thing has. So it's quite parallel evolution. Okay? So this is basically that part. That's second thing about the stock thing. Well, those are all public NHS hospitals, and so they have a stock of capital that has already been depleted over the years. Yeah. Thank you. You saved my day. Or at least my morning. Yeah, great. So on the capital stock, they have mostly depleted. And actually, when you see these things, these drops here, what they do is actually put money into the capital stock of the hospitals, which then pay to them, right? And there's some advantages in doing this, because if you put the money into the stock of capital of the hospitals, they don't need to take it to the deficit. It goes directly to public debt, so it does not show in the deficit. So for the Eurostat becomes debt increase and not budget deficit, and that's one of the reasons why they like to have these mechanisms other than other ones. But that's the things that they do. Okay, and so basically the main thing of this picture is 80, 34, 26, 44. For those that have seen the series Lost, these are not the numbers that you have to put. These are the rhythms they are the slopes of these things. Okay, which basically for me what matters is that we had a trend that was going down, and suddenly in the last year we have a trend going up. Okay, so I want to focus on this last part. Okay, so then the question is, can this tradition of the government at putting reinforcements actually creating a problem for themselves, as we could easily set in things? Okay, so I'm going to use all the data I'm going to use are publicly available from the portal of SNS Transparency, so it's a web portal from the government. They have the data freely available. The data on arrears are also published by the Ministry of Finance, which makes more confident that they are not hiding anything, because the other ones are seen as the enemy inside the government. And so we have all the information, monthly information on these things. So I'm going to use monthly information by hospital on several things. I'm going to use monthly data from 2013. I'm going to just use the hospitals, although the data set has information on other units, but the arrears problem is concentrated in hospitals. They are 98% of the debt of these arrears, so it doesn't matter to look on the other ones. Okay? And I have the information on name and location, so I can merge different things with the thing. So actually, one of the curious things of this data set is that the best indicator to locate, to merge the data sets is actually using the coordinates in the web system, in the web geographic information system they have. So I just use the location. It's the same location, it's the same entity. Okay? And so I will have data on the arrears and that, but I will not have on the hospital budget. Okay, I don't know how much each hospital received in the beginning of the year. Actually, they don't receive it in the beginning of the year. The contracts they set are usually done by May of the corresponding year, so they have almost half a year done with payments based on the previous year. Okay, so they have some information what they call efficiency measures, but it's not too much useful for these things. So my initial idea was to bring efficiency into this picture by having some sort of production function. That was probably what we're thinking about, but I was not able to have information on personnel, on resources, on people treated, and so on. So at this point, I'm not able to present that. Okay, so let's take the first question that I had. Is government creating problems for itself? Well, I'm going to use the settlement. I would like to use the settlement payments to see how does affect the behavior of the hospital in creating more debt. Okay? But I'm not able to use the settlement payments because they are not public. So what was the reinforcement in capital stock of each hospital is not publicly known. And so I'll use the reduction in arrears of that hospital from in this moment of time here. So the difference between December and November of 2016 will be my proxy for this settlement. So basically, I'm assuming that all the payment they received was used to pay that, and that is reflected there. But this is an approximation, right? I didn't receive any reply from the government about what will be these values, so they don't disclose that. And so what are the 3 questions I want to look with in a very simple way at this stage until I find a nice way to do it in a more elegant way, okay? By the way, we could see this talk as a first band in a concert, so I'm just entertaining you, and the big things will be with Marcos. So I'm just putting responsibility on him.
You're really making me a good favor.
No, if you want sophisticated things, you're going to deliver. So that's okay. So what are my simple questions for this part here? So first question I wanted to answer: people that had more debt received relatively more money or not? So in a sense, does the government reward having a higher stock of debt? Second thing is who created more debt received relatively more. So now it's not what is the outstanding debt, but how much they created over a year, whether they're creating debt actually brings you more debt. Not the stock, but the increase in the stock during a year. The third one is whether after you received money, those that received more are actually creating even more in the next year. Okay?
So conceptually, for you, what's the difference between receiving more money at the end of the year or at the beginning?
With the difference between these two, it's not the difference. Is
no, why it would be different than
why the two will be different?
Yeah.
Yeah, because if one thing is if whether the government is looking on what happened in the past year, and they give more money if they have more debt in the past year,
Yeah.
or if they have a legacy of debt, whether they pay them to recover all the past they had.
Yeah.
And the ones that had created more debt in 1 year may not be the ones with the highest standing debt.
Okay.
Because you have a past that comes from 2012 at least, okay? And so I want to see, do they reward the last year creation of debt, or do they reward the whole stock of debt, including more than that last year, right? Yeah, Luigi.
So is the idea here that potentially the hospitals are acting strategically in the sense that they might on purpose delay the payment so that they inflate their deficits in the hopes that they get more
Yes.
money?
That's it, precisely. Is there a Moller-Hazard effect? And why do they want to do that? Because they know that what they receive in the beginning of the year will not be sufficient, even in efficient terms, for most of them to cover what they are supposed to do.
The distinction there is that this only delay, if you think about the long-term deficits,
Yep.
This delay is just like an artificial blip in the fingers because sooner or later you, at some point, you have to pay. So again, is this distinction between the arrears and the deficits, which at the moment you're using as synonymous?
Yeah, I was using debt. Yeah, debt and arrears I'm using as synonymous because I'm using all the time arrears because that will be the debt in each moment, including the one that is still legally within the bounds to be paid.
So you don't have like a separate figure just for the deficit?
No, no. That's one of my issues. The NHS hospitals don't publish a yearly report where they have these deficits, right? The only thing that we know is the aggregate deficit that is created, okay? But someone knows it because they are adding the arrears, so they know how much they receive, so they should know how much they'll be paying, okay?
What's the penalty in the whole system? What's the real constraint? I mean, it seems from your story, you're just delaying or you're passing the financial cost onto the pharmaceutical or the so what's the real penalty here?
Well, depending on how government becomes forceful, they could ask you to close services and to transfer service with the other ones, and you could have the management changed at some point.
Do you know that?
They happened a couple of times, although the reason has been always presented that this guy has done such a good job, so he's going to take a new challenge. So it's never presented.
But can you mark that against
No.
your timeline?
No. I actually have a PhD student that's collecting data on all the boards and the evolution of the boards to see how those changes in the boards actually match technical expertise and or political motives for appointment. But at this point, we cannot trace that to individual hospitals on creation of this. There is no clear punishment of this, although in the past, when we're having this downward trend here, which was the exception, right? This in a year, that was basically naming and shaming by the Ministry of Health. So they were holding regular meetings with the hospital managers and telling them, you are not complying with these things. If you don't do well, we'll have to take some actions, which were always unspecified. Okay?
That means nothing on bed closing, nothing on manpower reduction.
No. No. Yeah. No threats of closing down hospitals or whatever, or closing even services. Okay? So one of the things that the government has always announced that there cannot be interruption of the service to the population. Okay? And so that this becomes something on which the managers can rely on. They may receive less for special programs. They may not be enrolled in specific actions. So there was a year and a half ago, there was a launch of a special program for reduction of hospital-acquired infections. And hospitals that were running more debts in more arrears were not eligible for that. But that's a mild punishment in a sense.
Is your PhD student collecting information on the type of managers?
Yes, this is looking on the CV.
Okay. John Van Renen's work.
Yeah, this sort of thing.
Clinicians have better.
Yes, on that sort of thing. Goes precisely on the. He started from their work in a sense, and let's see how can you go through with that. Yeah. So that's in that vein, right? And then it will try to collect information enough to try to connect the change in management to changes in performance that we may have this measurement. Okay.
Pedro, there's three players in this game, and I would
Yeah.
say that the hospitals are probably the least important.
Not
They
necessarily.
have very much control over volume of drugs, maybe a little bit, very little over price. And actually, this is a game between the pharmaceutical companies and the government, right? And the government should be saying, pharmaceutical companies are charging excess prices, hospitals won't be able to bring them down. Why isn't the government negotiating lower prices with the pharmaceutical company and saying, basically the pharmaceutical companies are just holding the hospital sector to ransom and saying, well, if you don't pay now, at some stage the government will bail us out, we'll still make abnormal profits, we're not going to reduce our prices, because at some point we're going to get paid anyway and we can wait 180 days.
Yeah. Well, one of my points is precisely this is not an issue between these two, and the payment difference here. Some hospitals are paying with 600 days delay. So it becomes a burden also on the companies now. Some of them are complaining. And during the Troika period, so in 2012, I think, one of the companies, Roche, threatened not to provide more to the hospitals on this. And actually they they just inverted the decision because they were the single ones saying that they will not provide. But it's not an issue. The point is that every time that the hospitals do not have money, they stop paying to the pharma independently how the prices are set. Okay, and the prices nowadays are set by direct negotiation with the government and pharma, although you can have adjustments at the hospital level. Okay.
So can we see what the nature of the price
So
is as part of this?
Yeah. So the price of drugs is basically already set in this part, and you also have to go through cost effectiveness analysis here for the prices, and it's the regulatory agency in Infarmed that plays a role here. And then you have, for some of the drugs that are not new drugs, you have centralized procurement by a service called SPMS that uses online procurement systems to drive the prices down between the companies. And so the government is already acting on this. But even with this holding fixed, once you have starting problems in funding your activity, you stop paying to the pharma, even if you don't have any change in the prices or quantities of pharma things. So they are just seen as the easiest guys not to pay. And pharma is probably close to 93 or 95%, depending on who you talk about, is that. But you also have people from devices, and you have people from consumables that are also here. So companies at the hospitals feel that they can sustain the payment, they will not pay them. That's why we don't have wages, because not paying wages will create social turmoil.
So Italy has a similar problem where they've introduced an arbitrage in the middle.
Yeah.
And they pick up the financial risk.
Yeah, but my point in the end is that even if you are able to get lower prices here, and you should, this will not solve the basic issue of hospitals trying to have a soft budget constraint by not paying to someone. And they know that the pharma is organized enough to try to get the money from the government. Okay, so in a sense, you have a kind of a collusion between hospitals and pharma. So in a sense, you have kind of collusion here. Well, that's my conjecture, okay? That you have a sort of collusion here where the hospitals are happy not to pay and the pharma is happy not to receive because they trust that the government in the end will put the money there. Okay, and you don't believe that?
No, I do believe that. I just believe that the strategy the government has adopted is to focus on the weaker partner when actually they renegotiate the prices with them.
Yeah, but if they renegotiate the prices with the pharma, that will not be sufficient over time to cover the hospital spending anyway, because they will still not paying the pharma as a way to solve their inefficiency problems. They will get someone to pay. So they open a new service. They order a new machine, heavy machine that some of them are using. One of them was considering to buy one of those surgery robots. And when you ask how they finance, they will stop paying pharma to fund those things. Okay? And so why the pharma goes along with it? Yes, it will charge higher prices because it's a delay in payment. And so let's make a digression here. So what will be a good theory approach here to think, suppose this is actually a collusion between three agents, and then so the question is, how do we break this collusion, right? And one possibility is that you don't pay, the government when it intervenes and puts more money, does not pay the full outstanding debt, and only pays the debt that has been recorded by the pharma with the government before, and so the later ones to present the debt will not receive, and that breaks, in a sense, this thing because it creates an interest of pharma revealing that the debt is being created and allows the government to act earlier. And once you get this thing done, governments get an early warning and they should intervene in the hospitals in a different way, not by cutting money or cutting services. They will not be able to cut services to the population. So should intervene by firing the management team and having eventually some government task force going into them and operating them. So a huge name and shame of the hospital management, including clinicians of the hospital. So that put a huge pressure on public opinion against mismanagement and bad service to the population from these people. So in a sense, hard incentives, when we have the public opinion making a pressure not to close services, is a difficult issue to deal with.
One way to test collusion may be to see the difference between prices and unit cost for the hospital of these drugs. Because there are plenty of rebate and untransparent bargaining of drugs, maybe.
Yep. But the point is, if you focus only on the pharma part, you're neglecting what could be the things that will be the other parts, like overstaffing with medical doctors, which is claimed that in some places you have, for the same output value, so in the name, there was a number that was for the same number of cataracts performed in the service, and cataracts is relatively standard. In one hospital, you had 28 ophthalmologists, and the other one you had 5. And they were producing the same amount of cataracts over the year. And so that was clearly overstaffing. And the overstaffing in this case was in one of the major central hospitals in Lisbon. And so they were not able to tackle the issue because they were the old professors being there and so on, they were able to block any change on that part. Okay? And so the inefficiency just is externalized to this debt. And so we have to think about ways of dealing with inefficiency, but not focusing on the pharma as a whole.
One of the things we talked about is how care is organised, particular bundles of care are organised, and which the DRG payment system also help you to move towards global budget facilities. The other is the price issue. I made the accusation the farmer might be making up in the office and charging.
Yeah, well, that's part of it.
That could be tested. And you can see whether that accusation actually stands up and then put the price. You know, if they're not making abnormal prices, fine. My accusation that
on the pharma prices, we can have we have some information. From the ones that are not new products, not classified as new products, you have the online procurement that is bringing the prices down. And here on the procurement, we have DCS, PMS.
Sure, yeah. No,
and we also have a group of 17 guys that put together and have done that. And some of the hospitals have actually started to produce some of the things that have generics. They start producing them because they thought that it would be cheaper for internal production than buying them. Okay? So on this part, they are going. On the new products, this is more difficult to know what are the prices. Most of these prices go into those what they call management entry agreements, which are typically price volume agreements in Portugal with the intention of budget control. But we don't know the price of this. These are kept secret. And they are kept secret basically because of international referencing issues from the companies. That's basically so. So that could be something. But even if you take the estimates and you take a good chunk of the prices down from this thing, you can. It will not be enough to make the deficit disappear. So that's what I'm saying. So if you just look on the new products and forget about, let's say these ones with procurement and international referencing are more or less aligned with, well, elsewhere we still have an issue there. And where is the issue? It's overstuffing. Are they doing duplicating services with others and whatever? Maybe. That's the thing that we don't know. That's kind of black box that we don't know, and they should open the black box. What I want to focus here is slightly different to say, even if they accept higher prices from pharma or just overstuff or whatever, if they know that they're going to collect money afterwards, one more client? No. They know they are going to collect more money afterwards, and they know they collect more the more that they created, then the government is actually creating their own problems with this process. And they have to rethink the solution that they are using, which is repeatedly putting money into the stock of the hospitals to get to renew this debt, and announce that this year the outstanding debt of arrears is actually lower than previous year. But then you are increasing the slope even with a smaller value. So they already announced here for this month a reinforcement for hospitals of 2 billion. Of which 1 point something billion will be to lower down this debt, to bring it to the lowest value ever. So they want to bring, the new announcement wants to bring this value here. But they are not concerned about the slope. And my question is about this slope. How can we control this slope? And that's where now this will be a challenge for Siri, how to model this collusion story and how to find the ways to break this collusion story. That's something that I've been thinking of, but I don't have a good solution there. Although I think that name and shame and making disclosure of more information and putting a penalty on the pharma and not on the hospitals will be actually easier, because it's more easy for the government to impose a penalty on the hated pharma industry than on the hospitals, and that could be the side by which you break the collusion. Okay, but that will be too. Okay, this is kind of a separate paper that I'm not presenting. Okay, so on these things, who had more debt, who created more debt, and what happens afterwards? They are stealing something.
It's Article 155.
Yeah, 2 by the price of 1. 10 minutes. Oh, so I can take some of the afternoon time? Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me speed up, sorry about it. So this is who had more debt, received relatively more. So basically I just plotted here the arrears in November 2016, and what did they receive at that year, at that moment, right? What they receive at that moment is a drop between November and December. Of course, we expect people that receive more have actually more outstanding arrears. If you look on the quick elasticity, there it's 0.5. The government is not rewarding more the ones that have more outstanding debt. So that will be the case if this was greater than 1. I didn't put other controls here. If I put other controls from hospital size and all the debt does not matter. So just a clean thing. Now, who created more debt received relatively more. So it's not the stock of arrears at November, is the gross in the stock between January and November. Okay? And for that part, you actually have something very close to 1. It's still statistically not equal to 1, but you still have the same thing. But it's close to the idea that the government is actually paying what was the increase of debt during that year is what is actually they are receiving more or less. Okay? So it goes more on that direction. Then you have who received more created more debt afterwards. And actually, again, you have a positive relation, but you don't have something an elasticity greater than 1. So it's not the case that those that receive the double produce more than the double of debt in the next year. It's again 11 months. So in a sense, it seems to be something to this story of moral hazard, but not as strong as it will be if those coefficients were higher than 1. Because in that case, we could actually be putting much more pressure on the system. And the other thing that I'm not reporting here but can be easily seen is that you have a problem concentrated in a couple of large hospitals like this one here, which is a major central hospital in Lisbon, which is accountable for 25% of the debt and of the arrears. And for that hospital alone, I would use one task force to see what's going on. But that's how to try to solve the issue. And you have so you have these things concentrated here. One thing that I did, that I didn't put into this picture, was to see, is this problem spreading or not? Okay, so it's becoming more concentrated or more dispersed. And actually, if you use kind of a concentration index for these things, it's getting more dispersed. Yeah, Xavier.
Is there any link between what they receive, if only they receive, and the budget that they get next year?
No.
But these are independent.
Yes. But they are. They don't establish that link, because what they do is just say they reinforce the capital stock of the hospital, and then the hospital management does what he wants. So it's not that the government pays directly to the pharma industry, right? So they have a body that negotiates the budget, and then they have an injection of money into this that is paid separately from another side. What they are creating nowadays is to create a special unit joined with the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Health to oversee budget control of the extra money that's being put there. But since this is not a problem of budget control, I don't think they are going to be very far in the discussion. But then we can discuss it later. Okay? Since now I have only 8 minutes. 6. No. I was trying to negotiate 2 more, but okay. So one thing that you can see is whether this behavior is different between the ones that are paid by capitation and the ones that are not paid by capitation. Okay? And the ones paid by capitation are 6 in this universe of 34. And that's no difference, doesn't matter. I was not expecting it to matter, but I did check that, okay? So there is no distinction between whether they are capitation or just global budget. So what I then tried to do was to see what happens with a quick model since I don't know the initial budget, I'm going to use as a black box thing, fixed effects hospital per year. That will give you capture the budget effects and see how this story that you saw in aggregate translates into the individual picture. And I long to see whether the guys that have capitation are different, and I want to see whether the very small or the very large behave differently than the others, okay? And that's basically the thing. So this S1 means after the settlement, so it is the last 11 months, well, actually 9 months, and OLS means the ones that are paid by capitation, and T is just a time trend, okay? So I want to see whether the slope is changing according to them. With the 4 minutes that I have remaining, this is just to show that I have done something with Stata. It makes me look sophisticated, right? Okay, great. Okay. So what are the important things? Well, we have the increase of growth in arrears is common to all. It's just not one of them. And although it's concentrated in one, it's common to all of them. There are no difference with the guys paid by capitation, although the guys which are larger tend to be slightly, have a slightly smaller growth with this negative coefficient. And I decided to use a different thing later on that will be when I will look for on the quality measures. I decided to use as a measure of pressure the residual from this equation as a measure of financial pressure on the hospital, because it's a deviation to the trend that they are observing. And this is my way to try to see something that will be related between the debt or the arrears they have and the budget that they may have, which I don't know. Okay? So that's that I will use later on the residual for this part. So quality of care, 4 measures. 30-day mortality on cerebrovascular stroke, ischemic, hemorrhagic, so whether you just have an hemorrhage or you have tissue dying, readmissions within 30 days, and wait days until program surgery. Okay? And basically, I just use the same sort of things with the hospital year fixed effects and so on. And the things that I want to look is the residual part and this thing whether the ULS behave differently with a trend. Okay? and this is just the period 1 interacting with things. It's just changes in the slope, which of course we're going to find changes in the slope because on the aggregate we have the change in the slope, right? Those initial pictures. That's not the initial part. The important thing, what I want to see is whether the guys that have facing more financial pressure actually have lower quality measures or not. And this is monthly data, so maybe I'm also trying to get too much of monthly data on this. Anyway, what we get here is that on 30 days mortality, this is kind of negative sign, but barely insignificant. That will be counterintuitive, but if we look for in the other measure of 30-day mortality, becomes positive, so we have a damage to quality of the services, and it's actually significant, but again, not very far from the things. If you look on the readmissions with 30 days, you have more readmissions on the guys that have more financial pressure, so they have lower quality of care in that sense. And for the waiting times, it doesn't seem to matter. Okay, and so my end thing is, first we have these arrears problems that is not going to be solved by extraordinary payments. So you need to find a clever way of how to deal with this thing. And my main challenge to you is not to think as a pharma problem, but as a management problem of inefficiency. So, and I'd like to have more inefficiency measures here to try to solve this part. I don't have those inefficiency measures at the moment. And I think part of the problem is moral hazard that the government creates by the rules of putting these settlements. And for that, at the moment, I have only very simple evidence. That was the one that I presented to you, but it seems to be on this direction. And it seems to play a negative role related to quality of care, in the sense that because you have these arrears, you have some management problems, and this is hurting somehow the quality of care. I have to check what is really the significance in terms of mortality rates, how many lives are saved or not, so that creates a shock. I didn't have done that yet. But could be a way to provide attention to the issue of these arrears, which are a mix of inefficiency of the hospital and inefficiency of the government in setting up the things. And I think that I overcome over 2 minutes more. Okay, thank you. This last part was fast, but.
In the quality bit, like, that doesn't control for the DRGs or something like that? Because I mean, could be that the very big hospital that one has lots of arrears is like the more technical and the difficult cases.
No, this they don't have. On the regression I put a measure of size, which is publicly available, which is occupancy rate and how many beds they have, which is not a measure that I like particularly, but controls for the size of the hospital, which is correlated to that part. I have DRG data now that I received in the city with all the episodes for the several years, which I can then use to have some more clear picture of these elements of the case mix index to control for this, that I can introduce later on a monthly basis for each of the hospitals.
I mean, just two very quick comments. So in terms of the direct cut framework, I mean, this really reminds me of the soft passage perspective literature.
Yeah.
When I looked at something in the past at that literature, I think that when you try to formalize those models, well, there isn't that much.
No, exactly. Yes.
The second comment is about the regression. So you see that the growth was very close to 1, which I think means that basically you don't have that much variation of recurrence. It's all absorbed through the cross-sectional variation. So,
yeah. And the question is whether on monthly data you expect too much to be happening over time on these indicators. I think that probably they will move more slowly than monthly variations in response to whatever. So I'm thinking about changing the unit of reference to, instead of being the monthly, to be 3 months, to have enough observations and so on. But then, if I want to use the data from here to there, so that means that I have a kind of 13 months here, and I have at the moment 10 months here. So I don't have much to work with, and so it will be mainly cross-section variation anyway. So if I start aggregating this, I will have 3 data points here and 4 data points here.
Another test of the soft budget might be on your pharma side, and I don't know through procurement records you can. If you're shifting the finances, you'd expect the bigger pharma companies to be more tolerant than the smaller ones, or some mix like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. My only problem with that at this moment, and I thought about using those data, is that the only thing that I have available is the information about who was the winner in the procurement. And it's a centralized procurement for all the hospitals. I don't know how much he provides in quantities for each of them. And in particular, I don't know what are the bids of the others that did not want for that part. And I'm trying to collect the information on all the bidding structure so that I can go on that direction as well. And I would like to throw in measures of, traditional measures of efficiency of the hospital. If I'm able to get some sort of cost function or production function, that could be set in here, okay? And that's the tricky thing in terms of getting the data for the hospital part. So in a sense, it was feasible because everything was available on the web to work with for the moment. The DRG data is available upon request. We have it, but now we didn't have to work. But we don't have, say, the number of people that work in each hospital by split between medical and by specialty and nurses and so on. That's still kept kind of secret in the statistics. They have published it in the past, but now they don't. So transparency for one thing. So yeah. Okay. But thank you. And